I am Nick. I am the founder of the Society for Esoteric and Entheogenic Knowledge, or S.E.E.K. Esoteric comes from the Greek esoterikos. It means inner, as in the knowledge reserved for the inner circle. This encompasses Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, alchemy, Kabbalah, and beyond. Entheogenic likewise comes from Greek roots. It means generating the divine within, referring to visionary plants across global spiritual history, which enable this capacity. Today, I am joined by Adam Butler. Adam Butler is the author of the Butler's DMT Field Guide, Butler's Psychedelic Integration Field Guide, and the Alchemist of Tears. Through his writing, Butler explores dimethyltryptamine or DMT experiences, psychological integration, visionary states of consciousness, symbolic encounters, and the enduring question of how extraordinary experiences can transform ordinary life. His work brings together personal narrative, contemplative practice, mythology, psychology, and comparative spirituality, while encouraging thoughtful reflection rather than fixed conclusions. In today's conversation, we'll explore the nature of DMT experiences, visionary states throughout spiritual history, and how these relate to mysticism, symbolism, and the perennial search for wisdom. So thank you very much for joining me, Adam. It's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you. I've read your books. I'm very impressed with your insights and thoughts, and I look forward to our conversation.
I am honored as well as excited. I've been blessed to have been interviewed by some pretty deep thinkers, and it's really pushed me to push my kind of rabbit holes, and I know you are going to throw me some doozies, so I'm very excited.
With that, let's get going. Mystical literature throughout history frequently communicates through symbols rather than literal descriptions. Sacred mountains, cosmic trees, rivers of light, celestial cities, serpents, mandalas, angels, divine couples, sacred marriage, death, and rebirth, and the conceptual philosopher's stone all appear across global spirituality. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung interpreted many of these recurring images as archetypal expressions of the unconscious, while historians of religion such as Mircea Eliade observe remarkably similar symbolic structures among cultures separated by geography and time. Visionary experiences often seem to communicate through mythic imagery rather than ordinary language. So your books frequently emphasize interpreting visionary experiences instead of simply collecting extraordinary stories. Why do you think symbolism is so central to these experiences, and how should people approach visions responsibly?
From a base level, I think because symbols transcend basic language, and I think language is always going to dumb a message down, and I think at some point symbols even kind of dull the edges a bit, but I think in essence symbols can, again, transcend time, transcend distance, culture, language, and I'm covered with symbols, and as I typically go like this with all of my symbols, and just the other day, the Om sign, I gave my first book talk at this place called Juices Up, and their sign and their symbol is the Om symbol. On the way there, I saw the Om symbol. And obviously that's a pretty common thing, but to be driven kind of along your path and constantly see the same signs they're like guideposts. And I think to the person seeking that information, there's a lot of information there to be found. Manly Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, I think, is a great book that goes over the power of symbols and sigils.
That's probably my favorite book of all time. You can find
too.
the Emerald Edition at our storefront. I have several of the Diamond Jubilee and Golden Anniversary editions. It's an incredible book. Some of the information is a little dated. It was written 100 years ago, but the conceptual core is relevant as it ever has been. And yeah, just in regards to the Om sign, this primordial reverberation, this universal sound, consciousness coming forth into the universe through auditory capacity. And it's an incredible symbol. And like you were saying, sometimes the ineffable nature of these experiences, whether it's initiatic and mystical or entheogenic, it's hard to convey in words how these experiences affect us. And sometimes the only way to pass along the knowledge to future seekers, further generations, is to try to preserve it in some kind of symbolic form. And so it is a double-edged sword. It can be misinterpreted. But in the grand scheme, I think symbols like the Om symbol have lasted so long throughout human history because they have such an impactful way of carrying forth this information.
Relevant to DMT in my particular story, I think DMT entities can probably be compared to symbols. So whether it be the mantis entities or the insectoid entities or the machine elves, I think they're symbols because there's an ambiance and a flavor to that particular image, and then that image does convey a feeling, a vibration, an emotion, and then in some cases a true lesson and conveyance of information. Kind of one of the reasons why that DMTX study is going on, because people seem to really be seeing and experiencing very similar things. So the idea is if people can be put into that state for a bit longer, maybe we can all kind of come back with a little more data points. But yeah, there's reoccurring symbols that thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are seeing and interpreting in very similar ways. And that's an important part too. So it's not, like when people talk about the jesters or elves, they're multiple in number, they're small in gesture, they're welcoming, they're kind of jovial and gesturing, like, hey, come back in the back of the house, let me show you, like, my buddies. And it's a common theme. And then all the other archetypal themes convey a very similar effect as you listen to other people's stories. So I think there's something there. They're not just images that our eyes are perceiving.
Yes, and Terence McKenna goes on and on about these DMT machine elves and this archetypal embodiment of this symbolic consciousness that can be understood and encountered through these DMT-like spaces. You kind of segued perfectly into the next question, so if it's all right with you, I'll continue. Throughout history, cultures across the world have described visionary encounters involving radiant beings, sacred geometry, divine messengers, heavenly ascents, cosmic landscapes, luminous light, profound unity, symbolic death, and encounters with apparent intelligences. Such reports appear through Amazonian ayahuasca traditions, Mazatec mushroom ceremonies, Bwiti Iboga initiations, Native American peyote rites, Vedic Soma hymns, Zoroastrian Halma rituals, Vajrayana Buddhist visionary literature, Jewish Merkava mysticism, Christian apocalyptic literature, Islamic mirage narratives, and numerous indigenous shamanic spiritual systems. Whether interpreted as neurobiology, spirituality, psychology, or some combination of these perspectives, these experiences continue to raise important questions about consciousness and perception. So many people describe DMT experiences as feeling less like hallucinations and more like entering an entirely different mode of reality. From both your personal experience and your research, what do you think distinguishes these states from ordinary imagination, dreams, or other altered states of awareness?
So I think there's a couple ways to separate that. So not only how the states are different from normal walking states, but if we're specifically talking about symbols and images and the images of entities, are they potentially just hallucinations? Are they constructed in our mind? I have a couple kind of thoughts on that. One, it doesn't matter. I'm interested in it, and it's certainly a topic that is worth research. But my kind of area of how I'm really interested in psychedelic health, about personal alchemy, and about what this all means is ultimately mental health associated, how do we find self-knowledge and self-love? And the information that's conveyed changes lives. It saves lives. If that prevents a veteran from harming themselves or others, does it matter? Is it real, not real? Is it a hallucination or not? So I just kind of want to put that out there, that the information, whatever the ontology of that information, I don't think it matters so much if it lands and it has an actual effect in this 3D realm, and especially if it's a life-saving, life-transforming, effect. I think it's also important to differentiate between other conveyances of information that happen in these elevated states. So in addition to the 5 normal senses of taking in those vibratory information, there are people that talk about telepathic conveyance of information, about having a DNA download or an upload. Right now in our normal 5 senses, you can get visual input, you can get auditory input, and in these elevated states, it's different, and it's important to differentiate that information. And I'll use my first day going into that DMT space as a perfect example, where most of the times you go in, for me anyway, I'm not interacting with entities. It's maybe 10%, 20% tops. But that first day, I went really, really deep, and I pushed it several times. But that last session, when I say I really got that epiphany moment that I needed, that was not a male voice, booming out saying things. That was not visual. We're talking about like these entities and spinning mandalas and all this fractal geometry. That was none of those. That was an instantaneous download of information where in a split second, it felt as though I had a lifetime of dots connected instantaneously. I mean, that really does reset the path of everything. And in my opinion, that's that true alchemy. Like when you have those notch ups, you really start leveling up to then now, how do you expand it? The visual ones, for me, those are typically long lasting, so you're going in for multiple minutes. Those are beautiful because you really are in awe of the visions, but then also the ability of your human vessel. And this is one of those things that Andrew Gallimore talks about quite a bit, and he's kind of the expert as far as the brain chemistry, is that there really should be no evolutionary reason why we have the ability to have such complex geometry and moving and morphing shapes. There's nothing at 46 years old that Adam Butler, as a white guy living in New England with my history, should be able to construct these Alex Grey type moving, morphing things. And it's not just because I've seen Alex Grey paintings. Like something ancient, something is coming through, and those types of visions and symbols, you can't unsee them, and you can't help but wonder what is being conveyed in it. And a lot of people ask, does it ever get easy going into these spaces, or can you get addicted to psychedelics? It never gets easy, in my opinion. I don't think you can get addicted to psychedelics. I have way more curiosity than fear. And that intellectual curiosity is because every time I go in, I get a lot of answers, but then that makes 10 more questions.
Yeah, like you said, I think it's important to look back across the historical record, and especially the contemporary art scene. I'm surrounded by paintings of Alex Grey, Mati Klarwein, Ernst Fuchs, Quiachol, yarn paintings and beadwork, Shipibo Kanibo, Ikaro tapestries. There's a visionary artist up in Oregon named Timothy White who depicts this shamanic space very eloquently. I'm fascinated by the ways in which people have been able to depict this fourth dimension, fifth dimension state in this third dimension and pull truths that can be conveyed through symbols, as we were discussing. I interviewed Dana Beal as well, and he's one of the leading global activists with Ibogaine, and he also discussed this fourth dimensional space and this ability to tap into this subliminal unconscious, so to speak. I know in your book you reference Carl Jung, and you discuss this unconscious shadow self, the shadow work necessary for the individuation process, the alchemical conjunctio, the rectification of opposites, and this process of diving deep into the shadow. And I liked your clarification that it's not something to fear necessarily. It's not negatives. It's not a negative aspect of yourself that you should fear exploring. It's more just this unknown territory on this map of the soul that requires you to release the fear, the burden of fear, and transform that energy, transmute that energy, and realize that in these dark spaces, so to speak, you can pull back this incredible amount of light, all of these keys to who we are, to our highest archetypal self, and it really has a lot of value. I was wondering, besides Alex Grey, who you mentioned often, is there any other visual artists that have conveyed truths in a way that you resonate with on a deep level?
Easy one, Sarah Finn Huntley. So she is the co-author and illustrator of the DMT Entities book that was written with David J. Brown. I actually was just texting her before recording with you, and I have a conference call with her afterwards. She's a visual artist that uses AI to kind of like accentuate her artistic creations. But that book with the DMT Entities, they compiled all of these trip reports and put everything together, and then she kind of pulled these common threads. So when people talk about mantis entities, when they talk about insectoid-like beings, I just did a great interview the other day. Her name's Corey Moo. She has a relatively new podcast, but she's had some really, really great people on it. And she was saying about how on her psychedelic trip, she got the information from the doctor, and she showed a picture of what she drew as the doctor, and it was a mantis head. And then there's another gentleman, Joey Phipps, who has the podcast Library of the Untold. He has a great book where he shows all his drawings, and they are mantis beings with multiple appendages. What I am really interested in is this common thread that goes through seemingly everything. And this esoteric entheogenic knowledge, there's a common thread with the symbols, there's a common thread with the imagery, there's a common thread through religion, through philosophy, and that's where maybe, if I could, throw in a compliment, and there'll be many of them, about you and your show and how you're disseminating the information. Because you're not just saying, oh yeah, there were ancient use of psychedelics and it made people connect to God. You're taking an hour on each period of time or each part of the geographical area and really pulling it apart in this beautiful way where it really shows the common thread. And it's not one or two strands of this thread. It's dozens and dozens and dozens of strands of these threads, and then dozens of ropes of these threads. Where's this ultimate weaver? Where's the thread originating from? I don't think I'll ever or will ever fully get that answer, nor do I really want it. The fun is in the seeking. The fun is in this exploration. The fun is being here in the now, enjoying this 3D meat suit, so to speak. The ability of what you're doing to see the threads, pull apart the threads, and then put it to the public in a digestible way, again, is why your channel is resonating the way it is. And I personally thank you, because I do feel like you're kind of this modern day Manly Hall. Ronnie Pontiac's really good at this. You know, like, you're just another way of voicing it. And another thing I think you're doing similar, aligned with I'm doing, is, like, in my first book, I have recipes about the brew. And I call them grandma's recipes in my book to try to have a little bit of levity with it. But those aren't my original recipes. Those are recipes from thousands or hundreds of years ago. And just like what you're disseminating, you're not like, oh, hi, I'm Nick, I'm really smart, these are my philosophies. You're just saying, this is what the literature states, and I'm presenting it to you. Absorb it and use it, alchemize it, so to speak, as you will. But yeah, I personally, as somebody looking for this information, appreciate what you're doing. So just personal thank you. I guess the recipes do also differentiate, and I think this is important too, because you would appreciate this. I mentioned about the recipes about ayahuasca, but then I mentioned DMT brew. So because you have to give it the respect, and you can't just say, oh yeah, I drank ayahuasca and think that's anything. Ayahuasca is 2 very specific ingredients and plants, and it's made in a traditional way and setting, and you know, you have to honor that. In my book though, and I have that recipe for traditional ayahuasca, but I also mentioned making DMT brew, because in essence there's thousands of plants with high concentrations of DMT, and there's thousands of ways of getting that MAOI, which is in essence what the ayahuasca vine does, which is provide that monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which allows your body to inhibit the metabolism of it to prolong the experience. You can make DMT brew with a bunch of different plants, and then add turmeric, black pepper, synthetic MAOIs, but then also add peppermint, ashwagandha, all of these things. And I recommend in my book, just like with beer or with wine, there's not one way to make it. Experiment with it, put things in it that you would like, and push the boundaries. And then my kind of suggestion with ayahuasca is find that level where you can comfortably sit in that vibratory state to comfortably receive and take back the information. In my experience, and I've smoked DMT hundreds of times, I've done ayahuasca maybe 20 times, DMT brew about 20 times, so not quite as much. The visuals are less intense, less stimulating, less chaotic when I drink it anyway. The visuals are just instant boom, and you just kind of sit back like in an IMAX theater like, oh crap. The ayahuasca or brew is more like a visionary quest where, you kind of get taken through a journey, and it's, you're walking through a fun house as opposed to going to that new sphere in Vegas where you're just like...
Very well said. And just going back, I do really appreciate the compliment on the channel. I'm really working to present objective information as opposed to subjective opinions. I feel like a lot of the time people are trying to persuade people of certain ideas, or use their own experiences as a means to connect with a greater population in a way that's still very subjective, trying to relate their opinions to the whole in a way that may not be objective in terms of analyzing the historical record. And there is so many different cultures using all these different substances in their very unique ways. And so it's not this one, you can't just say the psychedelic experience is this. You have to really do what we're doing and try to pick it apart, analyze these things under a microscope. And then you start to see that there are these great connections with metaphor, myth, allegory, symbolism that pervade these different systems. And those threads that connect all these different portions of the tapestry, those are what really fascinate and interest me, this unity that seems to come through when you're able to cross-comparatively analyze all these different global spiritual systems. So again, I really appreciate your appreciation. I know you've engaged and commented on numerous platforms of ours, and I just want to say it's incredibly humbling, and it's a beautiful thing to connect with other people who are really interested in making this space curated for those who are seeking this educational enlightenment across the globe. So thank you again for saying that. I've never shared this on the channel, but I personally tried Formosa Huasca, which is a combination of Syrian rue or Peganum harmala with the Acacia confucia, which provides the DMT, in contrast to the MAOI like you were talking about. And the experience from drinking and consuming this brew was incredibly kaleidoscopic, colorful, geometric, almost overwhelmingly so compared to some of the other entheogenic experiences that I've been fortunate to experience. and it was incredibly powerful, incredibly beautiful. But in contrast, it must have been over 10 years ago now, but the first time that I did try inhaling dimethyltryptamine, I was sitting on a couch taking these deep, deep hits until finally this breakthrough happened. And I felt like I was being transported up a well, so to speak, where I could see that there was something at the top, an opening of some sort. But as I was being pulled up in this spiral motion, I was looking around to just all of the wisdom of the world written on the sides of this well, whether it was scientific formulas, mathematical equations, language, translations, all of this knowledge that I couldn't comprehend. It felt overwhelming, the scope of the information that was being presented. And as I came out the top of this well, everything went black for a moment. In the distance, I just see this faint white light, and I start just walking toward it slowly in this vision that I'm having. And as I get closer and closer, I see it's the figure of this woman with her arms outstretched. And I'm approaching, and I'm kind of fearful. I don't know who this entity is, so to speak, or what this means, or the importance. As I get closer, I keep asking questions, I keep forming thoughts, and I can't get any answers. It's just complete silence from this figure until eventually I walk up face to face and just embrace this Isis-like, Ishtar-like, celestial cosmic woman, and just feel this overwhelming sense of unity, this overwhelming interconnectedness. And as soon as we embraced and this moment happened, I was transported back to my body, sitting there covered in sweat on the couch, unable to articulate, like you were saying, this ineffable experience. And it was incredibly profound and powerful, and it felt like hours, but it was this 5 to 10 minute journey. I don't want to go too much into subjective experiences or interpretations therein, but I wanted to provide some kind of context for somebody that may not be able to experience this or hasn't yet experienced it, but may want to.
So that was beautiful. That was poetic. You truly gave me goosebumps, because to hear you say that too, because I'm very comfortable talking about some of the more sensational kind of fireworksy type stuff. So to hear you, a very well-spoken, intelligent man, just matter-of-factly just state 10 paragraphs of profound, transformational, but then have that be, again, that common thread that is shared as best as people can. And if I could throw out another creative, I think, genius, I just helped a buddy, David Comstock, put out a book called Serpent Rise. It's a small book, and it's his basically transformational interaction with that very essence that you just described. And when he first sent it to me, it was one of those, it's like part written word, part channeled kind of prose poetry. But he's describing this beautiful common thread that you just stated. And for somebody that hasn't experienced it, and I think that's a big part of this alchemy, all of this hidden, or not hidden, but all this ancient knowledge has to be experienced. The Eleusinian mysteries, you had to go into the cave, be invited into the cave after passing the initiation, and actually do it. For the people that have these spiritual enlightenment moments religiously, like, they have to have that grace of God somehow be imparted to them. The psychedelic experience, it's very difficult for people that haven't had it to understand. That's why I just appreciate it. Like, how you just described that vision was perfect. So was it you just having a really deep DMT session, or did what you just experienced, was it real, quote unquote real? If what you just said really happened, you can't just brush that off to be like, oh, well, that was a cool 5 or 6 minutes. Like, no, he just tapped into some other something that goes way beyond just Nick right now, wherever you're at, and you were able to tap into something incredibly powerful. And we just commented about your ability to pull out the common thread of psychedelics and how that's a big rope. But I think that rope is part of a bigger kind of complex of altered and extended states of consciousness. I really state, and maybe we should say this as a disclaimer, psychedelics are not for everybody. DMT is definitely not for everybody. And I explore these other modalities like the darkness retreats in Monroe. I just signed up for my first float tank experience because I share with people that there are multiple other ways and modalities to kind of remove the proverbial plaque, to allow for that personal alchemization, to allow for the self-knowledge and self-love, to allow for the exploration of these types of channels that we're looking at. And it doesn't have to be psychedelics. And my experience doing all of these other kind of parallel modalities they're not just parallel. They're, again, kind of threads of the same rope. And the more and more and more I experience, like, I have so much to learn about sound vibration and sound bowl healing. And I have so much to learn. I haven't done like a silence retreat. And I mean, I'm still 1 out of 10 on my psychedelic and esoteric, seeking. And I can only imagine the ropes that I don't even know about and what the threads I don't even know about. But it's like everything is leading to the same proverbial mountaintop. And my experience now being in this psychedelic space and now helping serve people and really interacting with people when they're in these elevated states, whether it be at Monroe or in, you know, these other retreats, is that whether it's a 20-year-old single mom or an elderly, you know, woman retiring or a 50-year-old gnarly vet, you know, we're all coming very, very different experiences. But when we're sitting there kind of debriefing and when we're sitting there kind of having our conversations, we're all basically saying the exact same thing. And I think that's what the Buddhists, the Taoists, the, you know, Kabbalists, the Hermetic, you know, follow, like, you sit them all down and say, well, what's your main philosophy and principles? And it's like, oh yeah, we're more than our physical self. We're not alone. It's all vibration. It's all polarity. There's resonance. There's masculine and female. It's like, I mean, everybody's saying the exact same thing. And that to me is really interesting because, again, where does that lead? To me, it leads to God. And I don't think that's a dirty term. And maybe that probably does offend some people, but I think that encompasses everything. Infinite energy source. Once we all kind of tap into that, that's when being a human becomes fun. To me, that is the Alchemist of Tears. I've been through some major, major trauma. You mentioned about the Dark Night of the Soul. In about a month, I actually have a collaborative book coming out with 2 women about the Dark Night of the Soul. And I agree with you. It is not to be avoided. It is an alchemical process that's needed. It is the pressure. It's the fire. It's the caterpillar going into the chrysalis in order to, you know, turn into the butterfly. Like you can't avoid it to fully individualize and become a realized human. But it's a difficult process. It's not to be avoided. To me, it's to be absorbed with gratitude if you can have that, you know, wherewithal. But the commonality of everything is, I don't want to say it's too much, but it's like there's something else there, man. And we're all seeing it, but we're all kind of saying it in our own way. Let the exploration continue.
Beautifully said again. I saw that you mentioned David. I believe it's at the end of the Psychedelic Integration book. He has a poem there as well, which is, yeah, very beautiful. I'm glad that you were able to help another seeker pull forth some wisdom in terms of getting their literature published or aiding in the process therein. That's a beautiful thing to connect with other people who are esoterically or entheogenically inclined and have this desire to connect with the greater public and provide some enlightening education. So I do commend you there.
Can I asterisk that before you get rid? Because I think this is important as we talk about esoteric, and you even explaining the definition of esoteric and entheogen before starting the interview is perfect, because majority of people don't know those terms. So instead of people just coming in nodding their head, it's like, all right, it's nice. Like let's get that definition out. And part of exposing to the right people that are seeking it, this esoteric or hidden knowledge, is for the people that have it resonating inside of them. I can't tell you how many people that I come across that don't feel as though their voice is worthy. They don't understand their own divine connection, that their iridescent, unique facet sparkle of this divine source is exactly what's needed to be expressed. And Dave was just a random fan that reached out, and he's like, hey, would you mind reading my work? And I read it, and I'm being honest, it brought me to my knees. It gave me goosebumps. It was profound. I started crying, and I was like, David, you need to share this with the world. Like, this is tapping into something that is going to hit. The divine came in, synchronicities happened. A couple months later, this book is published. And I say that because I've met so many people that are like, oh, I can't publish a book. I can't get it out there. I don't know how to do this. And I've now self-published slash hybrid published 3 books. And I say this, not this, so this isn't bragging. I'm saying it because you can produce and self-publish a book and get it out there. Where my first book is sold in 15 countries. It's sold thousands of copies. It's put me now on 80 plus podcasts. It's opened the doors to all these amazing experiences. And I'm just some no-name funny looking guy from Rhode Island that wrote a book because it helped, you know, like psychedelics really opened my eyes. And I say that because if there's a story inside of you, again, if you have this cool, unique facet of you that should be told, there's somebody there that's waiting for that. Like, you are the perfect key to that person's lock. And there are so many beautiful people that came into my life synchronicity. And a lot of people kind of ask, well, like, how did you get into DMT? How did you get into these darkness retreats? And they fell into my lap and they were forced down my throat, where I didn't know of DMT, and then it got brought in by like 4 or 5 different people in a matter of 2 weeks. I guess I got to read Strassman, and I guess I got to watch The Spirit Molecule. And then, you know, same thing with Monroe. It was like, well, who's Robert Monroe? And then he has a Monroe Institute, and then out-of-body experiences, and then Gateway. It's like all these things just happened within a week or so. And that does seem to be how, I mean, even you, like you, between our mutual friend Adam, between the Psychedelic Writers Guild, between the, it's like, yeah, it's just this beautiful play. And if you can sit back and appreciate it, full disclosure, before we started recording, and it may sound corny me saying this, but like, hey, how are you? How are you? And I'm like, I'm buzzing at a 12 out of 10. And I mean that, like, because I'm connected to myself energetically, I'm comfortable in my own skin, and I'm literally in this 24/7 flow state, and not drug induced through DMT, just vibrating and tuned with other people in my energy, and it feels really good. And that is why I'm so passionate about sharing this message. Like, yes, it satiates intellectual curiosity, but more important, it allows a physiological shift to be comfortable, to then be like, oh, this is actually a pretty cool experience to be a human. Let's go in a cave and sit for 3 days in the dark. But most people are like, oh, how the hell would you do that? That sounds horrible. My darkness retreat was probably one of the most beautiful experiences I could have ever imagined, where now, and I mentioned I'm doing my first float tank, where it's going to be 90 minutes in the dark. And as soon as he said that, it's 90 minutes in pitch black, my whole body just got calm. I instantly was like, oh, cool, this will be like a little mini darkness retreat. So now I have that tool in my toolkit to know, and I know I'll be inducing endogenous DMT, which maybe we can get into that too, about the importance of endogenous DMT. But it's like, these are things where, you know, that'll be a random Wednesday where how many people are going to be pent up, anxious, angry, and pissed off to be alive when I'm going to be sitting there blissed out in a float tank. It's like, you choose. And I was, up until I had my proverbial midlife crisis at 40 years old, I was the pent up, angry, alcoholic person that was running from all of my issues, to now I wake up every day just leaning into what the experience is going to be. That's alchemy. That's the Alchemist of Tears, really.
Thank you for sharing. And likewise, I also struggled with mental health issues, and the esoteric and entheogenic facets of spirituality enabled me to transmute some of that lead into gold, so to speak, in alchemy terms, and really find joy in the wondrous and wonderful existence that has been provided. Instead of having all this fear about the things that were out of my control, I realized what was in my control and how I could best live up to my archetypal self, that Godhead, so to speak, that is driving me to the highest heights that I can reach. And I think also to your point about God, and I feel like it kind of has this, people have atheism or agnostic tendencies to rebel against this idea of God that was kind of put in us in childhood, this noun, anthropomorphic figure in the sky that kind of dictates our existence, that we have to ask for things from at a very basic level in some of these orthodox faiths. But in mystical and esoteric systems, they view God as this verb, and it's this Holy Spirit. It's anything that enables life to keep thriving, living, evolving, anything that enables us to take action in any kind of way, bring our intentions to manifestation through attention. I think it's important to realize that rather than having to view God in this orthodox context as this noun of this Father in the sky, it can also be viewed as this creative essence, this energy, this consciousness that flows through the cosmos, that lives in all things that live and breathe. And it takes away some of the edge of not understanding God as something outside of the self or outside of our world, to realizing that God is intrinsic in all of this life here on earth. In regards to the dark night of the soul, I've mentioned this previously, but Manly P. Hall has a quote that they wander in darkness seeking light, failing to realize that the light is in the heart of the darkness. Kind of goes back to our conversation earlier about Carl Jung and the shadow self and the individuation process, the alchemical conjunctio or rectification of opposites, and realizing that there's this beautiful wisdom that's found when you conquer the fears and explore this unknown nature that is within you, that helps you to become your most archetypal self, your personified Godhead, so to speak, and realize this mystical divinity within. Also, you mentioned this mountaintop where all these different global esoteric systems meet. I think it's, I've always described the global spiritual panorama as a prism, and there's one light that flows through this prism and emanates this multiplicity of colors. And in the same way, the singular divine source can multiply through the prism in humanity in all of these different spiritual traditions. And we have to realize that even though these traditions differ in their orthodox, exoteric interpretations, at this peak, this mystical peak, they all unite in this shared esoteric mystical unity. So I think that's another beautiful thing. And finally, you mentioned this experience of belief, and that kind of goes with this noun version of this anthropomorphized God. Traditionally, in all these orthodox systems, we're taught that we have to believe. You have to have faith in this exoteric way. But in a lot of these esoteric mystical systems, they champion gnosis or direct experience. And that's the tension between these esoteric and exoteric systems, is this belief versus this direct experience. And I think until you have these direct experiences, it's easy to judge entheogenic experience by what you're told in the media or by the worst versions of the experiences that are put forward in the news. Same with the esoteric. There's this mainstream view of whether it's Freemasonry or esoteric Christianity or even esoteric Buddhism, esoteric Hinduism, where the mainstream practitioners have this visceral reaction to hearing that somebody may find value in direct experience over this mere belief. The crux of the issue, I think, is you have to experience something before you can have an opinion that carries more truth than simply a subjective opinion. You have to put yourself through the trials to finally get the outcome that you desire, to get the answers that you're seeking. You have to go through, if you want to get to the mountaintop, you have to climb the mountain. And so I think that's another important point that you made. I don't know if you have any thoughts that you want to say before I move on to the next question.
Yeah, and I'll bullet point them because, again, beautifully done. So some of the most profound concepts can be conveyed in such simplicity. So you just saying, God, consider it a verb, not a noun. I'm sure you're not the first person to say that, but that's the first time I've heard it articulated like that. And that just instantly is like, yeah, so the law of vibration. And then, you mentioned how it's a perception. Like, yep, the law of mentalism. Again, just kind of completely ties into all these concepts that have been shared throughout history. You mentioned the visual of the prism and the light coming down. So if I could expand on that analogy, the individual factions and wavelengths of light that main light gets dispersed into are all perfect. They're all exactly how they need to be. There's no changing that's needed. And I apply that now to people. Like, people aren't broken. They're not, and I'm not saying like we can come better as individuals and as a society, but that idea of that perfected whole with all of those unique parts where, it's not like the edge of using a puzzle analogy, that the edge is more important than the middle piece, or the corner piece is ultimately the piece of more importance, or the piece that has the fluorescent coloring is really important, but the one with the dark background isn't. It's like, no, they're all needed to create that whole. And I think that's important as we all try to be comfortable in our own skin, where it's like, no, don't try to look like another puzzle piece or another individual or person. Really know that you are exactly that separated piece of the prism that you need to be. And then the differentiation between gnosis and faith. So I was raised Catholic, and of all the religions that I've studied, I probably resonate least with the Catholic religion, because they kind of forced stuff down your throat. And I remember being like 12 years old and asking the nuns teaching CCD, calling them on this concept of faith. And I actually got kicked out of CCD, and I wasn't being a jerk. I was just, challenging that concept, which kind of led me to being more atheist going through college. But then through my actual experiences of gnosis, now I have complete faith. It's a knowing. It's not like, well, I think there's a God. It is experientially known with 100% a beautiful yin and yang. This beautiful kind of masculine and feminine, and however you want to, which one's which. It's always a blending. I've learned to kind of apply that overall filter to everything, where it's kind of like a surrendering and succumbing, but a blending, but also being extremely passionate with directed goals, but just kind of letting the gnosis lead to faith, gnosis lead to faith, and then these synchronicities keep popping up. And then if I could, because you tapped in that you had a little bit of struggle, and we all do, with potential mental health, and how the feeling of depression, the feeling of anxiety, the feeling of lack of hope, despair, those physically just feel awful. I mean, it's draining, it's crushing, it's suffocating, where it's so easy to continue on this path of self-knowledge and self-love because it really feels good. Like it sounds selfless, but it's selfish in a way because it just feels so good. And then people typically ask, well, how do you know when you're aligned? How do you know if you're finding your higher purpose? How do you know if it's your higher self as opposed to lower self? Is it one of your smaller IFS parts or your bigger, overall controlling self? And how I try to word it is, it's like a tuning fork. The tuning fork is only going to resonate and vibrate with a like tuning fork. And you start going towards it, how does your body resonate? How does it feel? You want to lean into it or run away? And the fact that I've surrendered and I don't put anything through Adam Butler's vibratory filter, I do it through the universe's. So I just inherently, where does the buzzing feel good? So for me, the buzzing felt good. Don't stop drinking like an idiot. Stop treating people like, like it was all these things. It was like, now I've got this beautiful symphony of resonating vibrations around me. When they sound off, I know it and I pay attention and I correct it.
Beautifully said again. I do think it's interesting how the world is kind of paradoxical, and you kind of have to be selfish before you can be selfless. If you have this metaphorical cup, you have to fill your own cup, and you can help others by providing them with the life liquid, so to speak, that runneth over your cup. But it's difficult when you encounter somebody who is giving things to others before they've helped themselves. You realize that it can't be intrinsically whole in a way, the gifts that they're giving. You must have this desire to seek the answers for the self before you can truly help others. You can't just try to help others find their answers before you found them for the self. And it's kind of an interesting paradoxical thing where sometimes selfishness is selflessness. And then one thing just about the Catholic Church prior to moving on to the next question is, throughout global spiritual history, whether it's the esoteric facets of the Knights Templar with Pope Clement V, King Philip IV, Jacques de Molay getting burned at the stake, all of these Templars getting killed for having this esoteric view of Christianity, which the Pope came out and said that they were innocent after the fact. Or when you look at the European colonialism of the Americas and these indigenous entheogenic systems, you can kind of see the same pattern where these indigenous cultures were forced to become syncretic with the Catholic Church at the threat of extinction. So many times their sacraments had to be fused with the Catholic Church sacraments in order to preserve themselves in this spiritual heritage. And it's a sad fact that when an organization is the embodiment of power and they interact with others who may not be as powerful, they dominate these spiritual systems in a way that is very detrimental to the preservation of specific indigenous cultures, the diversity around the world. It is an important thing, and the Catholic Church seems to be at the forefront of having the power spiritually for centuries. And when it comes to the way that they interact with those who are less powerful but may have more inherent gnosis or direct experience of truth, it can be a very violent end for those esoteric and entheogenic systems.
Anybody look into the words and philosophy of Jesus, the man. That story is amazing and has so much value in it. The ritual, the manipulation, the fear, the Catholic institution is where I have an issue. The message and consciousness of Christ and Jesus is, I'm all about it. Jesus is my boy. I mean, he's in my prayers for sure. So I just want to, there is a differentiation and a big
Yes, no, I really appreciate that. And I'm not trying to
Jesus is your boy
throw
too,
any
I'm
negative
sure.
light on the Christian faith. I think it's extremely beautiful. I think
It
the
is.
esoteric
Yeah,
and mystical
aspects, yeah.
interpretations of Christianity are incredible. And the deeper you go, it's an incredible compilation of mythology with all this symbolism, allegory, these deep moral lessons, this universal love. It's very powerful. My qualms too are with the hierarchy, the institutional orthodoxy, the people at the top of the pyramid who may be harboring and sheltering others from the light that trickles down in order to preserve the power and maintain the institutional authority. So I appreciate your clarification.
Saying Jesus is my boy.
Yeah, I do want to, I know people, when they hear DMT, they hear entities, or they imagine entities. It's kind of the main question on everyone's mind. So this is the last question that I'm going to ask about the entities, but I do want to get any final thoughts that you may have. Reports of encounters with spiritual beings appear throughout global spiritual history. Ancient Egyptians described divine guides through the duat or underworld. Greek mystery traditions spoke of encounters with gods and daimons. Jewish apocalyptic texts describe angels guiding visionary ascents. Christian mystics report saints and heavenly messengers. Islamic literature includes encounters with Gabriel during the prophet's ascent. Hinduism and Buddhism describe devas, bodhisattvas, dakinis, and enlightened teachers appearing within visionary states. Indigenous shamanistic systems likewise describe ancestors, animal spirits, forest beings, and teachers encountered during sacred ceremonies. Whether interpreted psychologically, spiritually, or symbolically, such encounters remain one of the most fascinating aspects of visionary consciousness. I know you mentioned that it doesn't matter whether they're real or not, and I'd really appreciate that perspective. One of the most debated aspects of DMT involves encounters with these seemingly autonomous beings. How do you interpret these experiences, and do you think history provides useful parallels for understanding them?
Not only useful parallels, real undeniable parallels. So I think the language that we're using now is tainted, and rightly and necessarily so, by our current culture, our current language. There's some people that, well, Terrence McKenna said machine elves, and Joe Rogan talks about the jesters. So now those two popular figures threw those two terms out. So now people like me are just parroting them. It's like, I'm not here to parrot anybody, and I'm telling you that these are the same things that the people in Ireland were talking about, the fairies in the woods. And again, you name every culture. And again, the beauty of your show is that this is culturally spread out along our human history. So there is a parallel, and the differentiations, I think, are more in our current language than what we're seeing. Angels and demons, is that, what does that mean? And that's going to be subjectively different for each person. I do think the overall flavor and the commonalities are there, and that's why I think that DMT Entities book that I mentioned that Sarah helped illustrate is important, because there's so much correlation where a book like that can actually be created. There's so much correlation when you hear my stories and I start getting other people's stories, where they're valuable to share because there's symbols in there, there's information in there, something is happening. Now, my personal take on, is it real, is it just our brain hallucinating or not, is no, I do think it's real. I do think there is a dimension there that is always there. Just like right now, there's other microwaves, there's radio waves, there's TV waves, there's all this shit going through us. It's just, how sensitive is our machine or antenna to pick it up? And then what channel or dial do we have it dialed into? I think the analogy of being able to add and dial up our physical senses, and I've repeated this pretty much on every podcast, so I apologize for people who are like, yeah, how many times are you going to say this? But like, my overarching philosophy of all of this, whether it be psychedelics, whether it be all of these other modalities of altered states of exploration, is I really believe that the human body has way more than the five senses that we typically are told about. And if we normally think that those five senses can be dialed from a -10 to a +10, well, no. Those senses can be dialed from whatever, a -100,000 million and all the way up, to the million plus. But then we have another 5, 10, 15, or another 100 senses that I don't know what to call them, but it's clear that people have ability to have telepathic conveyance of information. Telekinesis has been shown. The autistic children in the telepathy tapes, where they're talking about all this conveyance of information. I think there's plenty of human examples to say somehow, some way, the physiology of our body can be tweaked up to an elevated state where we're getting more information. If I get into, I have an animal kind of analogy I want to use, but the study in the 90s that Strassman did, Dr. Rick Strassman, he's the spirit molecule. Anybody interested in DMT, I would probably start with him and his work. Most of his volunteers came out saying something to the effect of, the experiences are more real than real. And that's a kind of weird thing. Well, what does that even mean? Just like for somebody to try to explain the ineffable psychedelic state. How I interpret that, or how I try to explain it to people, is if you have a normal 7-minute walking experience in your normal walking state, you're going to say take in 100 data points. If you do that same experience deep in a psychedelic state, you're going to take in 1,000,000 data points, 1,000 data points. I mean, you're taking in so many data points in that original 100. Now, those original 100 are still there. You still got the ears and eyes and nose and everything taking in the reality, quote unquote. But now you have 90% more information and data that is conveying intelligible information. So how do you just dismiss that and be like, oh, no, that's not real because my ears, nose, eyes, and skin aren't receiving it? It's like, well, no, your intuitive brain is receiving it. How are you just going to, your gut feeling is feeling it. Your body just got goosebumps, and now every hair on your body is sticking up. There's a conveyance of information there. For people to be like, oh, no, that's impossible. Insects are very different from humans. All right, I get it. So maybe like that analogy to talk about an insect's ability to, take pheromonal molecules from a mile away may be difficult to understand. But there are mammals. We're a mammal. Whether it be a whale, whether it be a bat, whether a cat can see so much better, a dog can smell so much better, a bat can echolocate, and navigate in the dark, where we have the ability to tune these meat suits to take in more information. Anybody interested also in psychedelics, I would recommend Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception, where he uses the concept that our consciousness is a reducing valve, that there's so much stuff going on that in order for us to survive and not go crazy, we're only allowing we're allowing one channel, and we're allowing a TV channel, not the radio, the satellite, If we had everything on all the time, we wouldn't be able to do anything, certainly not eat and procreate and mate. So I think when we get into these elevated states, we're allowing all this other vibratory information in. And now I think what the alchemist or the person studying these esoteric teachings is how do you pinpoint, instead of just opening it up to the chaos so you become truly psychotic and you don't know and that will drive you nuts, to, all right, how do I use certain focus levels from Monroe to elicit certain things? How do I use 5-MeO DMT instead of NN-DMT to do different visualizations? When do I use MDMA to get more somatic connection to myself? And when do I do LSD to kind of have this cool technology upload? And that's where it's not one and done. It's not a magic pill. It's not just this blanket statement. And again, I appreciate your channel and people like you that are doing these types of work of pulling it apart, is that what do you want to experience? And make that intentional decision, seek it out, and then explore it. My darkness retreat, I took away light from my eyes for what ended up being 100+ hours. The first 3.5 days, there really wasn't any physiological effect, and it was kind of just me navigating in the dark. But just like fasting with food, once that metabolic shift happens, the whole kind of inside start changing. 3.5 days into my darkness retreat, the internal light started flashing, the fireworks started going, like the vision started happening. And I can only imagine what would happen if I could spend 30 days in the dark, a season in the dark. Like, it's like you would come out with, I'm sure, extrasensory sight visions than the normal person. Yeah, it's not some far-fetched, like, wow, these guys are really talking about some weird out there woo-woo stuff. There are savants, there are intellects, there are people that can do really weird stuff with their brain that is not explainable by synaptic firing.
And I know Terence McKenna talks about the heroic journey and 5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms and complete darkness and the importance there of the dark. So I can only imagine the amount of time that you did, how much deeper you could go, how many more revelations you were able to have. And I'm glad you brought up Aldous Huxley, both in the esoteric and the entheogenic space. In the esoteric space, he has the perennial philosophy, which weaves together these world religions in a really incredibly articulate, beautiful way. It is very deep, it is very dense. And then, as you mentioned, the Doors of Perception and the sequel, Heaven and Hell, if you're trying to express the ineffable, and we've talked about the difficulty therein, I don't think there's a better place to start if you haven't had a psychedelic journey, or if you're wondering what somebody who has an extraordinary gift of language could utilize to describe this psychedelic experience. I highly recommend Aldous Huxley's works on the entheogenic space and his mescaline trips in the 1950s. Incredibly beautiful, incredibly vocabulary dense and articulate.
What I liked about him was his humility. Like, it covered everything. He wasn't approaching it as a know-it-all. He was coming at it with true intellectual curiosity that was filtered through an intellectually trained mind, beautifully articulated. So yeah, that humility has to be there, because there are some Crowleys out there that are like, hey, look at me. This is my subjective kind of filter, where Huxley was just kind of the opposite. Everybody comes out of this too with more questions than answers. Like, he didn't come out of it to be like, oh yeah, this is the overall, I figured it all out. It's more just like, man, there's so much out there, which is where I'm at right now too.
Very true. You mentioned this 4th dimension, 5th dimension that's always present in this 3rd dimension that perhaps our senses can't attune to. In the Amazon with the ayahuasca experiences, the Huichol or Wisharika with their peyote experiences, in all these indigenous spiritual systems that use these entheogenic sacraments, they also describe this visionary realm that's always present. These ancestors, this means of healing, whether it's the physical body, the spiritual self, through these invisible mediums that aren't perceived by our sensory self. It is beautiful to understand that there may be this underlying reality that we just can't attune to quite yet with the developments in human evolution that have come forth thus far. There's a book from 1895 by John Uri Lloyd called Edidorpa. It's Aphrodite spelled backwards, but one of the quotes in that book is, "You're never more alone than when you're alone." You're never more alone than when you're alone. And it kind of hints that even when you're by yourself and you think that it's just you may be living in this world that is beyond your comprehension, with these invisible forces that are evading visible sight. And then in a similar manner, we can see as humans this certain spectrum of light, and we think that's all the colors that there are, but there's colors beyond the scope of our vision. And it's very interesting, like you were saying, with echolocation and bats, and different species are able to have these different experiences of reality. And what we think of as reality may be completely different in a different species. Like you're saying, maybe we'll move towards a state where we're able to open more and more of these capacities, whether it's through entheogenic plants or contemplative ritual, philosophical discipline, meditation, any kind of consciousness expanding activity that allows us to become more in tune with these extra sensory realms.
We talk about synchronicities, and like you say Edidorfer. So Edidorfer is such an important integral part of my life, and that book, kind of like right under Manly Halls, is, in this period of my life, is so important. So in the Alchemist of Tears book that I have, I actually have a picture when I was at the Monroe Institute. I was reading Edidorfer. I had my book there. I don't know if anybody's read Edidorfer, but it's all full of these beautiful artwork, and I don't know if you know the length of my beard, right? So I'm growing it like the character in that book, and I'm actually in the process of writing like a prequel sequel type Edidorfer, and the name is going to be another name spelled backwards. And again, it's another journey into the dark night of the soul, which in essence Edidorfer is. And I would highly, highly recommend anybody that hasn't read Edidorfer to read it, because there's so much of practical application and knowledge about self-exploration that comes out of that book, with really cool, travel through literal underground. But yeah, that book, just the fact that you brought it up, again, this beautiful synchronicity.
I have a signed first edition of that book, and for
Do
those who
you?
aren't aware, Llewellyn Drury is the main character of that book. He meets this I am the man character
Yep.
who leads him down this spiritual journey. They go into the center of the earth. He loses his sight, this introspective metaphor, and he traverses the soul. The artist that you're mentioning, John Augustus Knapp, also did the illustrations for The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly Hall. So there's the connection between those two books. But those have been pivotal in my life as well. So I do share in your appreciation.
Anybody interested in Edidorfer, and I don't know, maybe Nick, if you've heard this, there's a lecture by Manly Hall talking about Edidorfer. And not only the book about Edidorfer, but like how it came up and like in the context historically. It was awesome. I would definitely recommend reading the book, but that Manly Hall lecture, all Manly Hall lectures I would recommend listening to, but that particular one, it was so great to listen to him and then read it. And I think a big part of that book, well, a couple things. There's hidden knowledge everywhere, and sometimes, yes, you need to truly go into the dark and you need to lose your sight to see it. In my book talk the other day, we were talking about the dark night of the soul, and I riffed off what I thought was this like beautiful poetic. It was something to the effect of like, think about a basic analogy, the stars. Right now it's daylight still. Can you see the stars out? No. But as soon as it becomes dark, those beautiful iridescent, sparkly, guiding stars come out, and we all have those internal stars in ourselves, but you need to go into the dark to see where those stars are. And those stars really do align us with our inner core. To really understand the darkness and to put things aside and to go within is more than a metaphor. It is necessary for that transformation. It is necessary to come out through the dark night of the soul. And then a perfect kind of tie-up of what this all means and what it meant to Edidorfer and what it meant to those characters as individuals. And especially in this study of what we're studying now is to appreciate the 3D meat suit, to, yes, go into, be able to increase our antenna, increase our vibration, to interact with these other energies and certainly seek this information. But the plan isn't to stay and ascend in this 5D, to find our home planet, to find our whatever, to never reincarnate again. Or people are probably sick of me saying this, but it's like there are some people like, imagine if I could reincarnate into a whale or into an eagle, or how cool that would be. It's like, no, the point is to be 100% comfortable here right now in this very second in your own skin, where your soul is not seeking to go anywhere else, and it's really just like here, this very, very, very moment. What I'm interested in doing is going into these elevated states, understanding the true limits of the sensitivity of the physiology of my body, and then the limits of the information at the heights of those sensitivity that I can take in. And then when I'm in my normal walking state, how does that apply? Now that I know I can run at 1,000 miles an hour instead of just 100, what does that mean? Now that I know that my empathy can be dialed up where I can see things that other people can't. Some of this stuff may sound woo-woo, but I walk through the world way different than a normal working person. And I don't say that like I'm some special or unique. It's just I've removed so much of my plaque, and I'm so dialed in, and I've added so many of these kind of like antennas that it's a really beautiful experience. I think a practical application of what this also means is, it's like, well, so what, you think all that means is you're going into these weird states and trying to pull out information? What it means for me, as far as being a good human and then trying to share a positive message, is that I always think, so that this vibratory state that we're in is always there. So that means the energy of my Pepe is always there. So he was the most influential man in my life. So everything I do, I know he's there to see, like I'm on camera. I feel like God is there, that overarching, like, what's my morality? And when I weigh my soul on the scales at the end, does it weigh less than a feather type deal? There's that analogy. But now with this psychedelic oversight, I really know I do everything now, like the DMT entities are constantly watching me, because I know when I go into the DMT space, they're going to hold me accountable for everything. And it's not, well, what did you say? It's telepathically, what did you feel? And to the point where I can't lie. Like right now, like, I like your shirt. I think that's a really cool shirt. If I didn't like your shirt, I couldn't say that, because next time I do DMT, they're gonna be like, why'd you lie to Nick about his shirt? And it's like that type of accountability means, one, I'll never steal a pack of gum, but also, like, I'll never treat people like shit. I'll never treat me like shit. And I just know I hold myself accountable. Now, I am not enlightened. I'm a human. I'm flawed. I'm going to keep making mistakes. That doesn't mean that I've all figured it out and now my life, like, doesn't have any negative things going on with it. It just means that I got out of my own way. I became, instead of my biggest limiter, to being my biggest fan and my biggest asset. And I've been able to truly take everything that comes at me, good and bad, and alchemize it into self-knowledge. And then that ultimately, once that self-knowledge goes to a level, it just instantly turns into self-love. And then this is that kind of kumbaya, like, but what does that all mean? I really do think we're at this next step of human evolution, where culturally, evolutionarily, maybe genetically, we're at this shift where we've got to figure out something as a human species where it's not divisive speech, it's not hate, it's not bringing down people, it's not this hoarding of resources. And the people that have that sparkle in their eye, like you and I have, that have seen what we've had, it's just so easy to be empathetic, sympathetic, to think all is one, that we're all part of the same source. And it becomes very, very easy to treat ourselves with love and respect, and then translate that to our neighbor, our community, or whatever. And that is much needed in the world today. And I think that is found through seeking of self, through seeking of esoteric knowledge. And maybe some people like psychedelics was the catalyst to set that off, but not needed. The real thing that's needed is to know that you're worthy of this type of exploration. And I kind of guarantee you, as soon as people start looking in the mirror being like, oh, I'm cool, like, I'm awesome, I deserve this, and then it's just going to keep feeding, and then they'll be on your show 2 years from now being like, I found it.
Well, let's hope so. And last thing about Edidorpa, Terrence McKenna also talks about that book, and he says that there's a bunch of esoteric themes, Masonic initiation, and all kinds of parallels there with the esoteric spiritual side, but he also thinks that it's the first time that there was an entheogenic mass publication novel within the United States. And in the preface of the original edition, the author talks about, if you had this secret that was yours alone, that provided this creative inspiration, would you tell others about it or simply show them through your work, but keep the secret for the self? And he says he's going to choose the latter. And I think it's very fascinating to reread the book under this impression that John Uri Lloyd may have been under the influence of psilocybin mushrooms or something else to have these incredible experiences that provided this vivid imaginatory journey that then he could convey with such symbolic articulation and wondrous beauty. And it is an incredible story. And then you talked about how you have to come back with this gift, whether it's the bodhisattva ideal of realizing that service is the end goal, the hero's journey where there's this 12-step journey that all these mythological heroes that Joseph Campbell talks about, we'll get to that later, but returning with the gift for humanity is the end process. And so this traversal of the spirit, diving into these depths, requires you to find something that's worthy to take back to humanity, but then integrate with the greater whole and not selfishly hoard the key. And John Uri Lloyd, I don't think, was selfish, because he shared all of his knowledge and wisdom through the book, even if he kept the sacrament a secret from others. But it is an incredible just journey of self-discovery and the realizing that we must help humanity in any way we can, and to not sit back and be a spectator, not even a protagonist, but become the narrator of the story and have this more objective view of our own life, of humanity, and make sure that we're being honest with ourselves and with the world. Segues perfectly into the next question about integration. Nearly every contemplative philosophical system emphasizes that extraordinary experiences should ultimately produce greater wisdom, compassion, humility, discipline, and ethical transformation. Buddhism stresses insight into daily life. Christian contemplatives emphasize virtue over mere visions. Sufi teachers warned against attachment to mystical states in favor of integration. Yogic traditions distinguish temporary experiences from lasting realization. Indigenous ceremonial spiritual systems likewise place enormous importance on community, preparation, and post-ceremony reflection. The visionary experience may be brief, but integration determines whether lasting transformation actually occurs. So many people focus on the experience itself, yet your work repeatedly returns to integration. Why is integration often more important than the visionary experience alone?
So the newest book I wrote was the Psychedelic Integration Field Guide. For that very reason, because, so one, for me personally, so now what? It's just like my first, the DMT book. I wrote that kind of therapy for me, and that was certainly part of my therapy. This book of integration was, also talking to myself through this, but I think a lot of people approach seeking even esoteric knowledge in the same way that they would psychedelics, prayer, or meditation, which is this fear of, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to do it wrong, I'm embarrassed that I'll look stupid. There's this weird shame kind of associated with it. In the book about psychedelic integration, I reference how it's really important to have a mastermind group of people that you can bang ideas about. It's important to look for guidance. And, talking about the importance of your show, we're talking about why I'm writing books. So it's not everything has to just be subjective gnosis or faith. Yes, go out and get some data points and get guided. But my take home with psychedelics or with altered state integration, and it's the same thing really with taking psychedelics, is listen to your intuition. Do what feels right to you. Only you know intuitively if you should lean in or get out. And in my book, I try to explain to people, one, that there's no wrong way. I mean, unless you're harming somebody or hurting somebody. But if you're truly trying to connect with God, you're trying to find yourself, figure out what works, repeat what works, and kind of hone your own thing. And I think if people just give themselves the grace and the space to kind of come up with their own program, it becomes very easy to, yes, look for guidance, but then also intuitively know what feels good for you. But I think the overall thing with that is to know that you're worthy of taking the time. And maybe a foolish, but I think it's an important analogy because it highlights the fact that there's not one modality. Like, all right, let's do some Wim Hof breathing and we can do this. Or you have to do 90 minutes and then cold plunge and then do this. Or, I really think it can be, removing alcohol is a big part of my journey. So I'm 5.5 years sober from alcohol, and removing that. So the point is, alcohol is not the issue. Alcohol is not bad. It was my relationship to it. I needed that to then remove the plaque and then get connected to myself. But I say, for the right person, or to the particular person that's working 2 or 3 jobs, that's working 60 hours a week, to come Sunday and to go fishing at 5 a.m. with a 6-pack of beer and to catch a buzz and watch the sun come up while you're fishing, maybe that's the meditation you need. Maybe that's the prayer. Maybe that's how you connect to Jesus, like truly. So it's not, well, you have to go to church on Sunday. Maybe it is a 6-pack in a canoe on a quiet lake, listening to the birds chirp. And I think that's where people have to know. If you're sitting in church and you're feeling all angst and you're like, oh, this old lady stinks and this music sucks and why am I here? Then that's not resonating with you. Then don't go to that church. If you're, no, I feel like I like watching the sunrise over the mountaintop, so let's go to Cadillac Mountain in Maine and watch the easternmost point. Let's go there and meditate. Then that's where you're gonna find it. And I watched a gentleman on a podcast the other day say something, and again, simple, just like you saying, God's a verb, not a noun. It was, God will meet you where you're at on your journey. And I think that's really important for anybody seeking this, where God, psychedelics, DMT, Monroe Institute, darkness, it will meet you when and where you need to. And because of that, there's no embarrassment, there's no shame with where your learning level is. And as much as you and I are sitting here as, well, you're the expert, you founded this channel and you're asking me, so I must be some wizardly looking expert. No. We both have just as much to learn from everybody else. And the point is yeah, let's just explore on your own terms. And then if you feel as though you have valid data, come back and share it. And to the original point, to really tie it together, when we come back and share our individual subjective experiences, we see this cosmic, universal, ancient, esoteric thread that ties together damn near everything. And to me, that makes my individual life as Adam Butler easier. That makes my ontological position in the world much more easier to digest. It makes concepts like the dark night of the soul, like shadow work, like all these things just that much more palpable, but more importantly, exciting. Again, to really tie the bow on it, for somebody like myself, and if you've experienced it, to have a mental health issue or to be uncomfortable, I was at the point where I was so uncomfortable and there was nothing I could do to be at home where my soul felt at peace, where now to be where it is so comfortable and it is so good to be in your own skin. That is the ultimate goal. And if everybody can just touch that, feel that, that's the esoteric hitting message that I think most of these teachings were trying to convey. Was just the answer is within you. Self-knowledge and self-love will lead to that, and you're worthy of that exploration. It was a hell of a journey.
Most people think that God can only be approached through ritual and prayer in a synagogue, in a temple, in a church, in a mosque. But I think it's important to understand, like you were saying, that God can be met anywhere, and every thought can become a prayer, every action can become a ritual, and it's not, you don't necessarily even have to be having the spiritual focal point as the means for having the experience. It can really just traverse all of your subconscious realm and having this, whatever generates meaning, whatever generates a reason for living. Those are all the things that are spiritual in nature.
You'll know how to differentiate it. It's not like you feel it. Your eyes start tearing, you start crying. You know when you're getting touched by the grace of, call it what you may. You know, it's a different feeling, and it feels great.
Very well said. A growing number of historians have examined whether visionary sacraments may have influenced the origins of global spirituality. Researchers have explored the Soma of the Rig Veda, Zoroastrian Halma rites, the Eleusinian and Dionysian mysteries of ancient Greece, Mesoamerican mushroom rituals, Amazonian ayahuasca ceremonies, possible psychoactive incense in the Old Testament with the discovery at Tellerrad and the use of cannabis, and the role of visionary plants among numerous indigenous shamanic cultures. While many individual theories remain debated, there is a broad scholarly recognition that psychoactive sacraments have played significant roles within many spiritual systems across history. As someone who has explored these experiences extensively, do you think visionary entheogens can help illuminate aspects of religious history that are otherwise difficult to understand?
Not only yes, they're necessary. I think what your show does is that this isn't an opinion. This isn't like, oh, I think about this. And I mean, I'm a fan of Graham Hancock. I'm not throwing it out there like a negative thing, but it's like, this isn't some like theory that can be debated. Was there some ancient civilization or something? I mean, like, there's clear, distinct, again, maybe he's kind of right now a controversial figure, but there's a gentleman called Amon Hill that wrote a book called The Chemical Muse, and it's basically his PhD thesis on, the entheogenic and psychotropic use of drugs and plants, primarily in Greece and Rome, and how they're a huge, huge part of culture. And, he actually got kicked out of the academic world because it's like, well, how dare you say that people are using drugs? To your point, this now has been tainted culturally and time-wise as some negative thing to be shamed about, just like sex, just like some of these other things where it's culturally needs to be talked about in an intelligent way. So these visions, they are necessary. Now, I think the question is how do you have that vision? Do they have to be entheogenically induced by some medicine or some plant thing? I don't think so. I think they can be induced by endogenous DMT. I think, and who knows, that's one for me to say, but I know that not only NN-DMT, but my understanding is 5-MeO is also produced in the body. Maybe dopamine at high enough levels produces some sort of effect. How I interpret that is, whatever we're trying to convey with people, it has to be experienced. It's not something that can be read in a book or just told. It has to be something that you actually feel and absorb. A vision is one of the easiest ways to sensorily convey an informative, like, hey, it's right here. You can't unsee it. Like, what are you going to go like this and not? It's like, it's there. And I think the visions have to be addressed. And for some people, I've named all the voices in my head. I've got quite a few voices in my head. I don't think like, oh, those can't be real. I know the voices in my head are real. I don't try to run from them. But for me to try to articulate this, some people will be like, oh yeah, well, show me them. That's a little bit difficult. When you have a vision, it's kind of like, at least then you can say, well, I saw the lady in the white dress holding an apple and a snake, or, you know, whatever that may be. Most humans, that because they've had so much societal plaque built up on them, and I think no matter what time period, humans had their own kind of stuff to deal with, that message just sometimes can't be conveyed by normal, hey dummy, don't you see this is the obvious, where sometimes you need that like angelic intervention.
I often go hunting for used books, and I did stumble across a first edition of The Chemical Muse in hardcover, and it was $20 or something like that, and I purchased it and came back and realized that those books are going for up to $1,000 now after the attention that was brought on, and I find a lot of value there. Symbolic death followed by rebirth is among the oldest themes in religious history, which I discussed at length in my presentation on initiation in global spiritual history, dissolution, reconfiguration, and transcendence. Across cultures from Siberian shamanism to the mythic narratives of Inanna, Osiris, Dionysus, Quetzalcoatl, Krishna, Buddha, Christ, as well as those of the Sufis, Kabbalists, alchemists, Freemasons, and global systems of entheogenic shamanic spirituality, initiation takes the form of a voluntary or fated descent, symbolic death, and a return into a new form. Joseph Campbell documented this cycle in the 1949 work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, describing this 12-step hero's journey. Modern psychology, I know you mentioned Carl Jung in your books as well, similarly recognizes that profound personal growth often follows periods of radical psychological restructuring. So many profound DMT experiences involve ego dissolution, death and rebirth, or overwhelming confrontation with the unknown or shadow self. How have these experiences influenced your understanding of mortality and personal transformation?
Massively. So a couple things there, if I could. The term ego dissolution, and I understand why it's used and I understand how it's applied. How I try to interpret it in myself is that I don't think we can ever fully dissolve the ego or disassociate from the ego, nor should we. The egoic parts of ourself, our personality, that's the iridescent sparkle that we all have, and I don't think we should shut those up. If anybody is not familiar with IFS, it's called Internal Family Systems. It's a program developed by this guy, Charles Schwartz, where in essence there's our higher self, but then we have our lower selves that are individuated into smaller parts. So maybe there's the hurt little boy part. Maybe there's they call it like the firefighter part that's going to run from things. Maybe there's all these archetypal parts of us that we all kind of have. There's a beautiful movie called Inside Out, I think by Pixar, where it's a little girl and she has all these voices in her head. One's anger, one's joy, one's sadness, and they're conflicting. And what one's in the lead determines what emotion she's expressing. And with that analogy, it's not, well, I only want the good voices to talk and the bad ones need to go away, or you need to shut up and never talk. How I think it is if you've got 9 crazy voices, you need 9 seats at the table that they can all sit at. If you've got 12 crazy voices, then you need to make 12 seats and have everybody be able to express themselves. Hey, this is why I'm butthurt. This is why I'm yelling over here. See me? Basically everything, including our parts, are looking for validation and acknowledgement. So as soon as I acknowledged and validated those parts of me that were screaming like a little kid and said, listen, I'll listen to you, but you can't wig out in traffic and get road rage every day. It was finally when I took control of those parts of myself that I was then able to integrate it. And I think now I have a good relationship with all those crazy parts of myself. The fear of death or that kind of separation, I think a common thread that is constantly shared throughout the psychedelic community is a lack of fear of death. So there's 2, we're all one, we're all part of the same sauce, like love and light. And then I'm not afraid of death and this continuation on of this energetic energy. Through my psychedelic experiences, and not to say I had any like real super like past life regressions, but there were interactions with things that made me very confident that I had probably been around spiritually a couple times before. There was one particular interaction, and this ties into the entity conversation, where, again, very distinct categories. So at that point when this particular story happened that I'm about to share, I had quite a few interactions with the entities, with the gestury elves, and some of the interactions where you were kind of on like an operating table, and they were really like interested in looking at you and doing a diagnostic check, and they were going in and showing you how your body operated, and they were very, very curious about my body as a vessel. I got used to those types of experiences. I would go in, and it wasn't intrusive, it wasn't painful, but they were clearly going like through my body. And one of those experiences, I had an interaction with what I considered my future self, and it was a very, very clear, very profound interaction with me. And it wasn't me older, it wasn't me with that Edendorfer beard like we discussed. It was, I just knew it was me from a different timeline, from a different whatever, and I was energetically coming back to, again, do a diagnostic check, but then to kind of calm me and to be like, you're good, everything's fine, like, you're on course, and I'm just coming back to convey that to you. And again, was that just my brain playing tricks on me because I went really too deep on DMT? Or was that an actual experience with my future self? I don't know, and no one, there's no way of figuring that out. But what that did for me realistically is completely take away the fear of death, completely take away like the fear of pain. Now, I'm not seeking death, and I'm not trying to have experiences to put me through any type of dark night of the soul, but there's no fear of energetically that I will continue on. And with that, it just allows an ease of life. Most people, that's the biggest fear, is when am I going to die? But that's not even on the board. It's not like it's not even on the corner of the tiniest square on the whiteboard. It's like it's not even on my board. Again, how did I alchemize that? Through this process. Now that fear got alchemized into faith or gnosis, because I know when I pass realms, we'll talk then, but I'm very confident that my energy will be beyond just this meat suit.
Very well said again. In Siberian shamanism, and specifically the Evanki or Koryak cultures, they use the Amanita muscaria or fly agaric mushroom as a visionary sacrament. But interestingly, exactly like you described, they also say that they go into this space where they're dissected, they're pulled apart, organs are replaced, bones are replaced with metal, with different gemstones. And it becomes this reamalgamation of character where the old self is completely transformed to this new shaman self that is able to traverse between worlds or interact with the invisible and visible, the spiritual and the material. And so I think it's fascinating that there's parallels, whether the sacrament is one thing or another, whether the culture is here or afar, that this similar experience can happen.
Very, very similar. Not like, oh, they kind of are alike. It's like, no, it's the same exact story. Not to cut you off, but it's like,
No.
not, and it's not 1, 2, or 10. It's like all of them.
Thank you for saying that. And then also death. In order to overcome death, a lot of the time you have to metaphorically go through it. Picture yourself as already dead. Picture yourself as already gone. Realize that the earth is going to move on without you. Realize that you only have one chance at this life. You have to take care of your body, take care of your mind. You have to put everything you have into this existence, because whatever's after this life, whatever's after death is not assured. There's speculative theories from all these different comparative systems. You can interpret it in any way that resonates most with your soul. But in terms of the gnosis of death, it's people have had near-death experiences. They can describe those, but no one's been fully deceased for an elongated period of time and then be able to come back and say definitively, this is what happens. So because of that, if you can conquer this one fear of death, you realize that it kind of reverberates outward and has this ripple effect to where all fears seem to eventually coalesce in this fear of death. And once you come to terms with that ending of life, as Robert Frost says, nothing gold can stay, you kind of realize the importance of enjoying the transitory nature of existence while you're here and making sure that you're using it in the most meaningful, useful way for not only yourself, but also humanity, and living up to this archetypal nature of your highest form, your highest consciousness. So
it's enriching and liberating. Like, it's not some like, well, do I lose purpose? Does that make me now, just like walk around numb? No, it gives you more purpose. It allows, now you're like, cool, I'm going to enjoy every breath. Every time I eat ice cream, I'm going to savor every bite. Every time I make love, I'm going to really appreciate that. It's like, it's not a, well, does that take away meaning? No, it amplifies and multiplies the meaning.
Neuroscience has significantly advanced our understanding of altered states through brain imaging, predictive processing models, and studies of neural networks. At the same time, philosophers continue debating whether consciousness is produced by the brain, emerges from complex systems, or reflects a more fundamental aspect of reality. These questions intersect with contemplative philosophies that have investigated consciousness through meditation, mystical practice, ritual, and disciplined introspection for thousands of years. So modern neuroscience continues to study DMT, largely following the work of Rick Strassman and other leaders in the space. While philosophers continue debating the nature of consciousness and spiritual awareness, how do you personally navigate the relationship between scientific investigation and the enduring mystery surrounding these experiences?
I am in an extremely fortunate and honored position that I get to hang and bang intellectually with dozens of people in this space. There's such a great group of like PhD students. There's this gentleman, just throwing out names here, this guy Max, who's working on like the Grateful Dead and how the Grateful Dead and psychedelics and like the major effect that has on culture. This deep PhD thesis and kind of working on this. So there's a lot of really cool creative minds that are working on it from all different ways, from the consciousness aspect point, these etherical topics, but also very chemically people that are following these traces through the brain. You know, I guess how I personally navigate it is, again, lean in mostly to my experiences and in my intuition. Try to stay on top of the research, try to stay in the input, and just kind of go along for the ride. I'm not trying to be convinced of everything. I'm not trying to have my philosophy solidified by anybody. I'm pretty grounded at where I stand as far as how the levels of reality are constructed.
It's a double-edged sword too. I feel like science can provide answers that perhaps ourself cannot subjectively come to terms with in terms of the micro connections, the biology, the physiology. It's difficult for somebody to completely understand those processes. They may hint towards them in their own psyche and consciousness. Having the scientific data really validates certain parts of the experience and also provides additional information that's difficult to come to with subjective experience. And on the other side, science can't answer all the questions that our subjective experience can come to. So science is still figuring out this spiritual realm in terms of trying to pinpoint all these data points within the spiritual experience. But on the counterpoint, science is able to map out aspects of the spiritual experience and the entheogenic experience that would be difficult to really understand or know and have the gnosis therein without the science to back it up.
I can say, I guess maybe my own personal academic experience was I studied entomology for almost 8 years. So I was a bug geek. And when I got to my higher levels, I was taking 500 and 600 level classes. And you would think at that level of depth of understanding an insect or the insect, world, that I would know quite a bit. I would be comfortable with, hey, I'm an entomologist of this long. And I had way more questions than answers. And it was just each one just went down this tangential branching question where it was a never ending adding and adding and adding. And that's the same type of rabbit holes that I'm going through all of this. It's beautiful because it almost becomes where you're going out and seeking certain things and just to visualize it like you're moving towards a goal or towards knowledge or towards an entity or towards vibration, where then it almost comes like full torus kind of circle in, where then all that just vacuum sucks into you and you just sit there and everything just comes to you. And that's where I feel like I'm kind of at where I'm at now. I spent a lot of time seeking information and even just authors like Manly Hall and some of these terms that we're throwing out. How many people know Etta Dorfer? I don't know how many people know the Chemical Muse. But I think there's a growing big population that's finding real value in this, and it's going to land in our laps. Again, all this information will be met when we need it as individuals, but I think as a societal shift, and really I think a good analogy is as a society, human culture and society as a whole is going through its own dark night of the soul. And again, not to be avoided, not to be stopped, not to be like, well, let's get a one world religion, or let's stop the two-party government system and we'll figure it out so we don't have to go through the dark night of the soul. It's like, no, let's go through that metamorphosis. Let's be the caterpillar that grows our wings so that way we can stop this self-destructive path of status quo that just simply won't work.
There's a saying, the wise man knows that he knows not. And to your earlier point, I think it's interesting to just consider that paradoxically, the more one knows, the less one knows. And as you realize you're gaining all this knowledge and information, and as you get higher and higher up, you start to realize how much you just simply won't be able to accumulate in this lifetime due to a finite existence. And You can gather as much information as you possibly can, but there's always going to be so much more. For every one question you can answer, there's 10, there's 100 that simply you can't get to in this lifetime, and you have to prioritize which knowledge you're seeking, what's important to you, and how to
And
have as much of an
and
experience as possible.
the alchemy of that is to be excited about that, not depressed, and to understand that that's the beauty of this experience, and to not stop seeking, because some people will turn that into anxiety, into stress, and to be like, well, how do I connect all the dots? My first trip, and I've talked about it on multiple podcasts, was in essence connecting all those proverbial dots. That's a beautiful thing when that happens.
Some people may say, if I can't know everything, why know anything? You know, if I can't eventually get to this transcendent, enlightened state where I have all the answers, why even start questioning things? And to your point, it's very important that you have to use your time wisely here on Earth. You have to move as far as you possibly can in existence, gain as much information, have as many experiences as you can. It's part of the seeker's journey, and you can't tap out, and you can't avoid the confrontation with the shadow self or the unknown or the fear of death or anything else. It becomes intrinsically valuable. You will find meaning from the search, and it's not to be avoided.
No, and an easy analogy I think to use is like any type of video game. Once you get to the final end, and once you're about ready to level up or power up, there's a monster at the end. There's a difficult puzzle at the end that you need to solve. You have to defeat the dragon in order to get the princess. Life throws you those metaphorical end guys. Keeping with that analogy, if you come to the end guy at the end, you know that you're in the right direction, you're heading towards the right direction to get to the next level. It's not, oh, there's a monster over there, let me run away and go the opposite direction. I lean into those now. Maybe something that, again, I'm a very visual person, but every time I go through these Dark Night of the Soul lessons, I consider that I got a Soul Sash badge. So like a Girl Scout or Boy Scout badge. So I've got, now over the few years, I've got some badass badges on my Soul Sash. I've alchemized so many things. I've survived the pressure, I've survived the fire, I've survived the drowning, I've survived all of this. And now my Soul Sash has those badges. And those Soul Sash badges I wear with such honor, and I wouldn't be alive on this planet today if I didn't have those badges. You know, and it's not, well, let me go look out all these challenging badges, let me go, you know, stub my toe as many times as I can. It's like, no, but when those challenges come across to you, lean into them with character and integrity. The universe is not plotting against you. You're not broken or messed up. With gratitude, lean into it to be like, there's a lesson here for me to alchemize and learn. If we're saying it's true that God or the universe will meet you where needed, so are some of these adversities and challenges, and it's because you're ready to then alchemize and metamorphosize that into something, into the next level of you. So that's what allows me to walk through every day, where I'm not trying to have an easy day with no challenges. When the challenges come, it's like, cool, I'm leveling up again, and at some point, it just becomes a fun game to play, as opposed to, oh, I gotta fight a demon today. It's like, cool, I'm gonna fight a demon today. Whole different perspective.
I love that analogy, and I like in your book too how you talk about the mistakes that you have should not generate shame if they teach you a lesson. And as long as you're learning from those mistakes, they're moving you forward. And to sit around and just be overwhelmed by the mistakes that you made, it can inhibit you so much further than if you reflect on the mistake, realize that there's a lesson to be learned, and then carry that lesson forward into your future. So I love that you wrote about that as well. Last question. Interest in psychedelic research, contemplative practice, comparative religion, and consciousness studies has expanded dramatically during the past several decades. Universities, medical researchers, historians of religion, philosophers, neuroscientists, psychologists, indigenous knowledge keepers, and contemplative practitioners are increasingly participating in conversations that were once isolated from one another. This convergence presents an opportunity to investigate visionary experience with intellectual rigor, historical awareness, cultural respect, ethical responsibility, and personal humility, while recognizing that no single discipline possesses every answer. So I was fortunate to hear Rick Strassman, Alex Gray, Daniel Pinchbeck, and others speak at Manifestation Celebration here in Dallas in 2011 regarding entheogenic experience. I also attended the Psychedelic Science Conference last year for the underlying science aspects. As public interest in psychedelics continues to grow, what principles do you hope will guide the next generation of explorers so that curiosity is matched by wisdom, responsibility, and genuine spiritual maturity?
An easy one to answer, and it's not just, well, this is my thought. I'm honored again to be a part of a group called the Psychedelic Writers Guild, and it's a relatively small group of journalists, creators, editors. We're trying to bring authentic journalism to the psychedelic space. And that's not, well, we've got to form one voice and we've got to make sure we're all aligned. It's really just this the opposite. We're coming from very colorful and different backgrounds, but we're presenting the information with intelligent voices, with respect, with reverence. What has to happen on an individual level, remove the plaque, remove the self-sabotage, have an honest, authentic, communication with yourself. Same thing on a society level. That has to happen. With these conversations with the Psychedelic Writers Guild, time and time again, it's not, well, we need to cover DMT more or ibogaine more or this aspect more. It is very, very clearly, we yearn for authenticity. We yearn for honesty. We yearn for true expression of self. And that's what I would like to be expressed not only in the exploration of, the reporting back of, not only the psychedelic space, but every space. In what world is authenticity not a good thing, or honest communication? And for me, in my personal life, I had everything removed. So all of my personal wealth, all of my status, all of my money, everything, where all I had left was integrity, character, my word. And maybe because that's all I had, that I really know how valuable that is, because everything else can get taken away. And I'm a perfect example of, you think you own something or you think there's security. No, there is no security unless it's about your integrity and character. Human interaction, so when we talked about symbols and I went like this, and so obviously I put my hands like this, as in this like namaste, I see you, I hear you, I love you, if need be I'll hold you and I'll be with you. That honest, true meaning of namaste, of just, I appreciate you, I'll absorb you and all of your energies into mine, and we'll just be in this space together. That idea of namaste, if we just apply that to everything, including psychedelic exploration, is I think the way to go, because that doesn't allow for one loud voice, whether it be mine or yours, to be too overwhelming. It allows us all to look in that proverbial mirror. It allows us all to do that individual alchemization that's needed. I think in life, in institutions, in organizations, in self-exploration, it's about honesty, it's about authenticity, and it's about what resonates to your core. And then part of this, and maybe it's along with kind of like removing shame and being comfortable in your own skin, is that one, you're able to receive the message that you get in the mirror, but then more importantly, you trust the source of that message, which is you, which is God, which is, but you don't argue it. You intuitively say, I got this, and you trust in yourself. And so like with my journalistic writing, it's very easy if it passes my stink test or not. And as I'm kind of on this leadership team of this Psychedelic Writers Guild, it's like, well, how do we format the overarching structure of, we need some kind of legalese and some wording of it. But in essence, my kind of thing is like, does it pass the stink test? And it really kind of just needs to be that simple. Is it full of honesty, authenticity, character, and does it resonate with everybody's true core? And apply that to self, apply that to exploration, and apply it to psychedelics and esoteric knowledge. And you'd have a good day doing it.
Great way to end. I do appreciate the Psychedelic Writers Guild is where Adam Mazio, I believe he's the guild master this year, at least that's my understanding. And he was the one that connected me and you together. So I'm very grateful to Adam. I'm grateful to the Psychedelic Writers Guild. I'm grateful to you for your time today. I did want to just pitch, if you haven't explored his books and his writings, he has Butler's DMT Field Guide, Butler's Psychedelic Integration Field Guide, and The Alchemist of Tears. Go support him, get your copies. Again, I'm just so grateful that I got to sit down with you. We ran a little long, but I do think the information that we covered was incredibly valuable, very dense. You're very well read, very well experienced, and it's been an honor and a privilege to be able to talk with you.
Thank you. If I could, and thank you very much for showing my books like that. But as we said when we started it off, this is not our knowledge. We're channeling it. And I think both of us feel honored that we're able to give our little bit of our voice on it. So as much as, yes, I appreciate you promoting my books. And if you'd like to buy them, they're available on any online resource. But on every podcast and everybody I interact with, I always give away free PDF copies of my book. So if anybody wants the information in those books, you can have them for free. I can easily send PDF emails with all of those information of all 3 books. So again, if people are seeking this information, it's not, well, I don't have $10 to buy a book and I can't get it. No, if you're listening to this and my words are resonating and you want to learn what I've learned, send me an email and I'll send you the free books. then you can share it, and then you can share it, and then we can do that evolutionary shift that we need to have. So booksbyadambutler@gmail.com if you want those PDFs.
Beautiful encapsulation of the entheogenic message, just to enable people the information that they desire so that they can seek the answers that will fulfill them, will make them whole. I think that you're a great embodiment of the entheogenic experience and just a beautiful spiritual soul. So thank you again for just being here, and I look forward to maybe speaking again in the future, maybe another interview down the road. It's been an honor. It's been a privilege.
Thank you. Same. And I'm here.
I'll talk to you next time.